I've been living in Japan for 5 or 6 years, and in that time, the kind of explosion of Japanese literature translated into English has been kind of cool to see. And the stuff getting translated, you know, the Kawakamis, Hiromi and Miyako, and the Yokos, Ogawa and Tawada, you know, of course, Murakami. All that stuff is great, but the great part about living where I do is that I get access to some of the more unusual or perhaps less widespread Japanese writers in English translation. So I've gathered a few of the ones I have that I think are interesting and I'd like to talk about. And this idea sort of came to me as I was reading this book, which is The Shooting Gallery and Other Stories by Yūko Tsushima. Her name might not be too unfamiliar to folks. She's got a book, Territory in Light, which is pretty well read, and she has a collection or a story put out by NYRB. I think it's called Woman Running in the Mountains. It's like a yellow cover. So she might be a name you've heard before, but this book in particular doesn't have too many reviews on Goodreads. I think around 200. These are stories put out from New Directions, so that's always a great sign. And they're translated by Geraldine Harcourt, who is a translator into English of Japanese that I've never heard of before. So this was really interesting to try. Tsushima is perhaps unfairly so most famous for being the daughter of Osamu Dazai. You know, and she grew up fatherless. Dazai ended his life when she was just a baby. And that the influence of growing up without a father and then growing up into a single mother herself lays the groundwork for a lot of the stories in here, or all the stories in here. All the stories in here are about women who are either single mothers or are burdened with caring for family members. There's some sort of pressure put upon them by Japanese society that they're all kind of fighting against. And it's this very feminist view of Japanese society. Tsushima was born in the late 40s, and these stories were published, I think, from the mid 70s to the mid 80s, and this collection came out in the late 80s. So she's a contemporary of Haruki Murakami, who is, you know, for all of his attributes, is not what I would call a feminist, and so seeing a feminist perspective of this era of Japan is really powerful and interesting. Tsushima's most popular work, Territory in Light, these days they call it autofiction, but it's sort of part of this bigger tradition of Japanese literature called the I novel, where it's a novel narrated by a nameless I, a nameless first-person narrator who is in many cases a stand-in for the author themselves. And perhaps the most famous example of that is from her father, No Longer Human. And so that part, I think there's only one or two stories in here that are first person, but it's really clear her sort of position in the trajectory of Japanese literature in the 20th century. In particular, the story in here, this one, The Silent Traders, it's really, really powerful. It's maybe just 10 pages about a woman who lives near a park, and she takes her children there, and she's reminded of when she visited the park herself when she was young, and the park is sort of a refuge for discarded pets, discarded cats and turtles and dogs. And she sort of proposes this this relationship between the ownerless pets and fatherless children, and she ties it together really, really beautifully in this story. The title story of this collection, The Shooting Gallery, is also really, really excellent. Compared to the other writers on this list, or the selection I have, the percentage of her works that have been translated into English is maybe the highest. So it shouldn't be too difficult to get her stuff, but I'd like to see more of it in translation. And I think Geraldine Harcourt is like the primary translator of her stuff into English. So there's a quote on the back from, yeah, Donald Ritchie, there he is, that the translation is so good you forget it's a translation at all. From Donald Ritchie, you know, you gotta trust that. So, first one, Shooting Gallery, Yūko Tsushima. The second book and writer I wanted to talk about is Shiga Naoya, or I guess Naoya Shiga is what we would say, but I got this copy with the Japanese style of the name, and it's always stuck in my head that way, so he's Shiga Naoya to me. This is The Paper Door and Other Stories. Shiga Naoya was born in the late 19th century and was writing basically from the 1900s until his death in 1971. And so these stories, I think the dates are in here, 1904 to 1945, but a bit of a gap during the war years. Naoya is one of these writers of early modern Japanese literature who, one of the great things about these writers is that the opening of the borders of Japan, and you know, some people were able to go and travel and learn about you know, European writers and American writers and bring their styles and philosophies into Japan. So, you know, famously, Natsume Soseki spent a few years in England and brought back what he learned for his writing. Naoya as well, he is clearly influenced by the Russians, and I think most likely it's Tolstoy. I've still never read any Tolstoy, but that seems to be a lot of what you know, thematically and philosophically what he's getting at. These translations by Lane Dunlop are excellent. Dunlop, I think, is a really well-regarded Japanese translator, and he did this anthology as well, a late chrysanthemum, which I think you can find sometimes in like in a mass market pretty easily. These stories are just like picture-perfect short stories, some of the best I've read. My particular favorites are probably at Kinosaki, which is an onsen, a hot spring village in Japan, which is kind of famous for being a haven for writers. And so if you go, they have lots of like book-themed cafes and book-themed installations and stuff, and museums, and you can visit huts where people, you know, wrote stories. The other one I really loved, well, I liked basically all of them. This book was almost perfect. You know, this one, Akanishi Kakita, is sort of a, you know, traditional Japanese narrative of love in sort of more feudal Japan. You get the sort of classic early modern Japanese male figure who's kind of a you know, invalid or whiny and disloyal, but philosophically bent, and it's sort of driving this existential dread and infidelity. It's really great stuff. And Shiga Naoya is a very highly regarded writer in Japan, but only a handful of his works have been translated into English. I think you can get a copy of A Dark Knight's Passing, which come in those these really cool looking, I really like the style of the Kodansha mass market paperbacks of the Japanese writers. I have a few of them. I think you can get that one. There's another book of his, which I think you can get on Amazon. The book is called Reconciliation by Shiga Naoya, and that one, it looks like you can order online pretty regularly, but not enough. There needs to be more Shiga Naoya translations into English. I'm begging, you know, whoever hears. Like, he's one of the best in my opinion. This is The Paper Door and Other Stories. I read this book last year. This is Dream Messenger by Masahiko Shimada. Shimada's a contemporary writer. He was born in the 60s. And when I started this book, I got it because it was super cheap from one of my favorite bookstores in Pittsburgh. And I'd never heard of this writer. I'm always looking for Japanese writers. I think I'd never read anything translated by Philip Gabriel either. So I went for it. The first chapter, I was very underwhelmed. It seemed like it was going to be another like existential kind of mystery, like Murakami, or kind of like a Paul Auster as well, or maybe like a less philosophical Kobo Abe. But from the first chapter, it totally devolves. It goes all over the place, jumping between characters. There's some kind of like Japanese flavored magical realism, which is kind of cool. Shimada's kind of cynical about Japanese culture, which is really interesting. You don't get a lot of that in Japanese fiction, at least that's been translated. You see sort of broader criticisms of modern society in general, but really like attacking Japan, especially post-war Japan. Shimada does not like it, and he inserts himself into this book at one point to give some criticism, and I think it's over here. Inviting to a reading circle of writers and critics, one novelist named Masahiko Shimada told me he's seriously thinking of making me the main character in his next novel. So some postmodern stuff going on. There's a boy who has like an imaginary friend, or like a parasite in him, and he can hop between people's dreams. There's a woman chasing him from Japan to New York and back, and she's being funded by this aging Japanese celebrity. It's cool stuff, and Shimada is kind of less of an establishment Japanese writer. His stuff is a little bit harder to come by in Japan as well. I've managed to pick up a couple of his books, but they tend to be at the more specialized used bookstores. They don't really have them in stock in like the local book off or whatever. I really love this book. It's kind of got this funny weirdness to it. This chapter, a Japanese Rip Van Winkle, a worried-looking dog eating pizza. Lipstick marks. Cool stuff going on in the pages. I really loved it. It's got a new, interesting flavor to Japanese literature that I'd like to be exposed to more people. This one also has a criminally low number of ratings on Goodreads. Yeah, this book's got 58 ratings on Goodreads. I'd like some more people to read it. Another one of his books is translated into English. I think it's called Death by Choice, which you can get. And here and there, maybe a couple of stories. I think one of which I have coming up. But that's Masahiko Shimada. The next writer is probably my favorite Japanese writer that I've encountered since living here, who is severely under-translated in my opinion, and that's Teru Miyamoto. I've got two of his books here. There are two more books of his published, translated into English. They're put up by Kuro Dahan Press, which is like a small press specializing in Japanese culture and translations, and they do really good work, but their books are I don't know, they've got that like print-on-demand texture to them, and it seems like they're the means of producing like a beautiful physical book aren't as important to them as exposing the writers, which I can dig, but I think these two are really excellent physically as well. This is Kinshu, which is put out by New Directions, and you can get this one in a paperback too. And this is Inhabitation from Counterpoint. Teru Miyamoto is a writer from Kansai. I think he was born in Kobe and grew up in Kobe and Osaka. He's also the same generation as Yūko Tsushima and Haruki Murakami. His books are very grounded in like blue collar family life, especially in Kansai, Japan. This book is an epistolary novel. It's letters between a woman and a former lover who she encounters on like a cable car up a mountain, and they sort of she recounts her life since they parted, and the man shows no signs of having changed at all when he finally responds. And this book is far out. It's kind of like another one of these, it's a young Japanese man who is sort of being guided by his libido, and meets a girl, and he doesn't act too well to the girl. He's kind of needy and possessive, which, you get that a lot in Japanese fiction. But in this one, the added twist is that he has he's renting an apartment, and as he's trying to like hang up a picture, he hangs a nail into the wall, he hammers it in, and he pierces a lizard to the wall, and the lizard doesn't die. And so this struggling, pierced lizard, hanging on for dear life in his crappy apartment, is kind of this metaphor throughout the book. It sort of mirrors his own personal struggle. There's a really excellent sequence in here at a Zen garden in Kyoto where they encounter some German tourists. There's a really kind of convoluted section at the end where the boy works at a hotel, and they go through for like 20 or 30 pages about like this hotel's inner like social politics between like the managers and things like that. I didn't love that part, but Miyamoto's writing is very grounded and peaceful. He fits into the same category as maybe a Banana Yoshimoto or a Jacques Poulain for me. Very like easy breezy, beautiful. This book is a little more agitated than the others. There's a collection of 3 stories called Rivers, where it's 3 stories collected by Kurodahan Press, and those ones are all excellent. They're 3 excellent stories, and he's got dozens of books, dozens that have been untranslated. I think there are 4 collections in total of his books in English available, and I've read 3 of them. Teru Miyamoto, he needs some love. He needs a good, a good translation. I think Roger K. Thomas, Roger K. Thomas, he's been doing the translations for these. I don't know what he's up to, but this is me kindly asking. More Teru Miyamoto in English. All right, I want to talk about a couple of anthologies I found out here, which they might be a little more difficult to find, but I think they're pretty neat. The first one, this is one of these Kodansha mass markets. It's an anthology called Monkey Brain Sushi, New Tastes in Japanese Fiction. And so this is like your sort of 90s Japanese resurgence stuff with Murakami, kind of weirdish fiction. I don't know a lot of the writers in here. I know, so there's Murakami, and there's Masahiko Shimada. But the rest of these writers, I don't know so well. I think I know Genichiro Takahashi. Maybe I had one of his books. But there's also like a manga section in here, Japan's Junglist Day. This is pretty far out. I really want to read these stories. These are, it's edited by Alfred Birnbaum. I don't know where his name is. Birnbaum has done a bunch of work with Japanese writing, edited by Alfred Birnbaum. But the stories all have individual translators. So let's see. This one translated by Terry Gallagher. I think this is Amy Yamada, Kneel Down and Lick My Feet. Monkey Brain Sushi. This is a really cool anthology I'd like to read soon. And all of these mass market Kodanshas, and Tuttle has some mass markets as well. They're really cool, like aesthetically. I love these. I don't really go for mass market literature too much, but this set is I love these ones. The last anthology I have is Modanizumu, which is sort of a Japanese way to say modernism. This is an anthology of modernist fiction in Japan, which I found at a book fair in Kyoto, I think in Golden Week in May. This is put out from University of Hawaii, who do really, really good stuff with Japanese culture and literature. I have a handful of their stuff, and it's all kind of academic, really, really great stuff. This one's got a signature from the editor, William J. Tyler. I think he wrote this in Japanese himself, and this picture sort of matches the thing on the cover. You can see an English translation of his name here. This is a modernist fiction, so all of these stories, kind of the big writer in here is Kawabata Yasunari. He is the big name here. Ishikawa Jun, I think, is famous as well. I don't know this Kaiji Motojiro, but there's a bunch of stories from them. Edogawa Rampo. So modernism in Japan, it's a cool thing to consider. So it's from 1913, so it's kind of after after like Natsume Soseki had put out some of his bigger novels, his first set of novels, and this is like the youth of Kawabata and like Tanizaki, and I think Mishima was born in 1925, so it's before he was able to come out with stuff. It's a really interesting era I'd like to explore. I think it's a really beautiful book. I'm happy to have it, and I'm looking forward to digging into it eventually. Modernist fiction, Modanizumu. The last one I want to shout out is these two books. This one's probably familiar to some people. This is Hojoki, which is an account of the burning of Kyoto in the 12th century, from Kamo no Chomei. I think it's 12th century. And this book is collected often in Penguin. It's paired with Essays in Idleness. That pair is translated by Meredith McKinney, I think. And I really wanted to read Essays in Idleness, but I wanted to read the Donald Keene translation. And so I was looking for a separate edition of Hojoki, and I found this one. This is translated by Yasuhiko Moriguchi and David Jenkins, who are a translation pair, and they've done a handful of works. This edition is really beautiful. It's got this nice illustration, and it lays it out kind of like a poem instead of a narrative or an essay. I remember looking at the Penguin edition of Hojoki and Essays in Idleness. Hojoki is just sort of this 20-page brick essay at the beginning, and then Essays in Idleness is all these small pieces at the end, and I didn't really want to read Hojoki in that version, so finding this one, it was really, really interesting, beautiful read, powerful stuff. I really love this book and this physical edition in particular. This is from Stonebridge Press, who I think I've talked about before. They do really, really good stuff with Asian literature and Japanese stuff. And I wanted to mention this because I found another work translated by Moriguchi and Jenkins, which is The Dance of the Dust on the Rafters. And this is a collection from the Ryojin Hisho, sort of folk songs translated or collected in the 12th century by Go Shirakawa, the emperor, or the sort of cloistered emperor at the time. And these are sort of not quite haiku, not quite like tanka. The form sort of changes throughout, but they're sort of collected songs that they've laid out in this poetic style. And these are really, really beautiful. I love this old Japanese poetry. This is the stuff that you find in The Tale of Genji, and these are like folk songs. So imagining these poems being sung is really interesting, and it makes sense because the Heike, the Heike Monogatari, is also traditionally sung. So the fact that singing in Japanese literature, they definitely have a partnership going back, at least 800 years. I flipped through a couple of these, and you get the images of, you know, dew and the moon and parted lovers, and you get references to famous locations from the Tale of Genji. So there's a poem in here about Suma. There's a poem in here about Akashi. I was really lucky to find this one from Broken Moon Press. I don't know how common this book is to find in the States. I just thought it was really interesting, and the translation pair, I thought they deserved a shout out because this book was excellent, and I like what I've seen from this one so far. So that's it. Those are the books from Japan that I think you know, deserve a shot. Hopefully someone sees them and can find at least one of them. And I'm hoping for more translations in the future.